Mr. Speaker, to the motion. This is a very important day for the state of Illinois. We're going to decide, are we going to continue the status quo or are we going to change? 47% of the people in a poll before the crisis, they want to leave the state of Illinois. 115,000 people left, and I think a lot of that has to do with high taxes and high property taxes in this state. The thing that really interests me is that we have a whole bunch of rating agency experts here in the chamber, it seems. People believe that they know what's going to happen, and it's very simple. The rating agencies look at one thing, the ability to pay back the debt. They don't care if you raise taxes. They don't care if you cut spending. In fact, they would actually prefer, though, you cut spending because there's more certainty. We see what's happened in states like Connecticut. When you raise taxes, you actually reduce the economic output of those states, and you ultimately bring about less revenue. And what we're seeing now is that if we pass this tax increase, Moody's is telling us that we're going to junk. They're giving us a roadmap that this state is going to junk because this budget is full of blue smokes and mirrors, and this budget is not going to accomplish the fundamental reform. It's not going to change pensions. It's not going to change Medicaid. What we do know for sure is that this budget is going to hurt people. We've all heard from our constituents. They're wondering how they're going to pay their high property taxes. They're wondering how they're going to pay their living expenses because we're raising their income tax rate by 32%. And what do we get? Nothing. Nothing. We get nothing but more taxes, more of the status quo. There's an alternative. We could stay here. We could do our job. We could adopt pro-growth economic policies. We could make Illinois a state that people want to stay in. So I ask everyone to please do the right thing, stand up for the taxpayers of this state, and vote no for this tax increase.
Mr. Anderson for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To the motion. I appreciate the previous speaker's comments, especially the comment that this is a historic day for the state. I believe it's a historic day because it's a day where we decide the fate of our state. Do we want to save it, or do we want to let it go into meltdown? I think that is sincerely the options that we faced. Now, since about, I lost track of the days, since Sunday, I think, when we took the original vote, it's been kind of brutal for me. Hate mail, death threats, my personal cell phone being given out. It's been tough. But you know what I reflected on, what I thought about? Was the last 2.5 years of people suffering because we can't get past impasse. So if I have to take a couple of days of that, I will be happy to do so, because I'm thinking about those people, the people who are most needy, who are most vulnerable, the autism funding, the members of the mental health community, the developmentally disabled, the at-risk youth, our higher education system, our education system. They have been suffering far longer and far worse than I ever have. So if I have to take those slings and arrows for a while to help them, I gladly will. Now, what you've heard today, of course, or yesterday, is that Moody's has indicated that they might downgrade us. They have not indicated that they will. They have indicated that they might. And two of the things that they said would be important in that are, one, our ability to pay our back bills. Representative Harris, Greg Harris, went through that process and explained that that is a part of the bill. When they review it in more detail, I'm confident they will see that. And there is also money to improve our pensions there. Are we done? No, we're not done, but we're moving in the right direction. But the most interesting thing I learned from the Moody's report was the characterization that their concern was the lack of bipartisan support in this Capitol. Who knew that the old kindergarten checkbox of plays well with each other would affect our bond rating? And that's the reality, ladies and gentlemen. The lack of bipartisanship, the bitter infighting that we've been experiencing for 2.5 years, this impasse has affected our bond rating like nothing before. So let me tell you, I've said it before, I'll say it again, impasse politics do not work. They do not work for the state of Illinois. They have never worked. So, Mr. Speaker, Governor, I implore you, we need to work together to get this done. and we have to do that now. Now we have a budget in front of us. And don't forget what happens if we don't pass it. It's not just the certainty of the bond downgrade, because that's what's going to happen if you vote no. We're also out of money. The comptroller has told us we're out of cash. Our state employees are going to get laid off. We're going to have disaccreditation of our universities. Our bonds are going to default. We are going into free fall if we don't do this. So for those of you who say there's a better option, great. Do you have the votes? You do not have the votes. Our options are this or financial meltdown. So my ask is that we vote for this, that we give our state a chance, and that we continue to work on the reforms. I believe that this side is ready to work, and I also believe that your side is ready to work, to continue to develop those reforms to make the state great. So in the end, I want to start where I was about a week ago, which is I asked for all of us together to save the state. But more importantly, we have to save it together, because now everyone has told us that's the only way it's going to get done. Thank you very much.
Mr. Morrison for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To the motion. This is a historic day here in this state, and I've, like you, talked to a lot of constituents lately, and what they are demanding is reforms. They've had enough. It's true that if you compare the income tax rates in states around us, if you look at just that silo, sure, you could say that Illinois' flat rate will still be competitive. But that's not the only thing that our constituents are looking at. That's not the only thing that businesses look at. When you look at a high property tax, and that without reforms will just continue to climb. My district is in Cook County. For many of you, you live and your constituents are in Cook County. It's just more and more and more. And while certainly we do need a budget, and yes, people do want predictability, but you know what they're getting? They're getting another predictable outcome. When the state of Illinois and all of our local governments run out of money, what do? Go back to the well, go back to the taxpayers, squeeze a little more, squeeze a little harder, and we all know it. We're squeezing so hard, we're squeezing them out. We're reducing our base of taxpayers, which means if this passes, we go right back to them again. Who knows, a month from now, 6 months from now, a year from now? It's not going to solve our problems unless we address the fundamental reforms. In the Wall Street Journal this morning, there was a great commentary. America once led the world on tax reform, and it concludes this way. Lower tax rates do not guarantee economic growth, but they help. So we're doing the opposite, and it will hurt. We're taking more money out of the private economy and allowing the public sector to grow. We cannot have a healthy state. We can't even have healthy government if you're squeezing out the entities that actually provide the tax revenue. We can thrive again as a state, but we have to do things differently. This is the wrong path. I urge you to vote no.
Mr. Fortner for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Speaker. To the motion. We've had a budget impasse now for over 2 years, and I thought, since we are looking at a set of probably 3 votes that together make up the package for the 2018 budget before us, that it's worth putting in context what those numbers are and ask 2 questions. Is it an appropriate, fair budget for where we should be today? And does it balance based on what it means to have a balanced budget? I'm going to take up the second one first, because so often we hear about how we fail to balance our budget year after year. And we have certainly put forward some unbalanced budgets over the years, admittedly so at the times they were done. But there have also been balanced budgets by what it means to be a budget. A budget is a prospective document. not a retrospective document. So if at the end of the day, when you do your audit report, it says it didn't line up, yes, it wasn't balanced, but none of us have the kind of crystal ball to know that in advance. So we have to ask, is it balanced based on what is going forward for 2018? And yes, in the appropriation bill, SB 6, that we may see an override motion for as well, in that bill, there are appropriations appropriate to fiscal 2017. Over $1 billion of those. Those are for services that have been rendered, and yes, they will be added to the stack of unpaid bills like so many of the other things that we have accumulated. Because we're accumulating at a rate of around $39 billion over the last year, due to a combination of what we have to spend, court orders, constitutionally required payments. They add up. Yet we're taking in, I would have thought, about $32 billion, though we just saw a report from COGFA today. That number is probably even less in terms of what we took in. That's a big gap. So now let me turn to the budget before us for 2018. In that document, to try and get a handle on it, back in April, I spent my Easter recess trying to pour through some spreadsheets with the help of our very expert staff on this side, using numbers from COGFA, the group that we rely on to put together numbers, using numbers from the Governor's Office of Management and Budget. I went through and looked at the different spending plans that had been out there, and what I found was that where we probably should be, if I took the last time the four caucuses came together on agreement, which was in May of 2012, and project that forward, the number you get is $36.3 billion for fiscal 18. What we have here is $36.1 billion, which is certainly, it's actually under the number I would have predicted, but it's certainly very close to that, and more importantly is well below the $39 billion we are spending at. Furthermore, the revenue, the motion we are considering at this point, exceeds that budget by a few $100 million, and that's important because we need to be addressing the $15+ billion of back bills we have accumulated. And having some additional revenue is necessary, because there's otherwise, all we would do is we would just manage the cash flow but do nothing for the back bills. We have to have that extra revenue. It's the only way to start moving down on the back bills as well. And between what we have in the BIMP bill, what we have in the revenue bill, the pieces are there. Are they as much as I'd like to see things paid down? No. But they're what we have that brings 2018 into balance. With my last little bit of time, let me talk about reforms, because I would certainly agree there aren't as many reforms out here right now as I would like to see. Things like workers' compensation, things like the property tax system. We need to address those. But that doesn't diminish some of the reforms that we have worked on, parts dealing with procurement, some of the local government work that has passed and moved forward. There are real reforms that have gone forward, and I certainly hope that everyone in this chamber will continue working, and let's wrap up based on a lot of good negotiation that has gone forward and get those other pieces done as well. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Wheeler, 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To the motion. There's been intense concern raised in the last few days about the potential for the downgrading of our state's bonds to junk status and the dramatic and lasting consequences that would bring. And but it should really disappoint all Illinoisans that the General Assembly did not do its job and send a budget along with substantial reforms to the governor's desk back in May to avoid this potential catastrophe. Instead, a budget and tax hikes were sent to the governor's desk that everyone knew was going to get vetoed. And even with that tax and spending plan that passed, it still may not convince Moody's from downgrading the state of Illinois bonds to junk status, even with a budget in place. So rewind for a second back to my remarks on the floor just a few days ago. Before the tax increase passed, I said the bond houses that we all of a sudden care about, they aren't going to see any change in our pension costs because we aren't actually addressing pension reform. So it shocked me when I read the Moody's statement yesterday when it says, so far, the plan appears to lack concrete measures that will materially improve Illinois' long-term capacity to address its unfunded pension liabilities. Seriously, people, nobody's making this up. This is real, and it's in front of us. Moody's believes that the state has $251 billion in unfunded pension liabilities. And without substantive pension reform, Illinois won't be able to afford that debt. This isn't a political statement. This is actual, real stuff right in front of us again. Just so we're all clear, this is not new. Moody's has been telling us for a long time that Illinois is on the wrong financial track. In 1973, Moody's gave Illinois a AAA rating right out of the gate. Then in 1991 through 2013, we were downgraded 11 times. We've been downgraded 3 more times since 2015, including one time just last month. That's all real, and we knew it, and we're still running things this way. That's why the governor and many of the Republicans on my side here have been fighting for reforms to change the trajectory of our state's horrible finances. My friends on the other side of the aisle keep saying, oh, the reforms are either on the governor's desk or they're on their way. But I'm sorry to inform you guys, those lipstick reforms won't cut it. We can't just accept watered-down bills that will have minimal savings or virtually no impact just because we're calling them reforms. Concrete reforms with real savings are required and long overdue to save Illinois. So for 2.5 years, we've been working on these reforms, real reforms. But we can't keep stalling and passing reforms in name only that won't actually change the status quo. It's time for us to get real. It's time for us to get to work and get these reforms into actual statute. This is what the General Assembly should have done, and we could have done, back in the spring of 2015 when we all got together for the first time. Reforms first. They change how we do our budget, then we can actually sit down and get a real budget done. And here we are doing things in the wrong order again. And I'll put it out there because I have to, maybe someday in my tenure down here, we'll actually start with the first step first, and we'll actually do a revenue estimate. Thank you.
Mr. Skillicorn for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So there's a lot of talk of this Moody's and what they wrote, and they just don't sound very impressed with what we did here. And unfortunately, we passed a massive tax hike, and we passed this budget. And if you look at that letter, it still appears that a credit downgrade is looming over our great state. This budget is junk. Let me read a quick note from someone in King County. And he says, I'm already being forced to sell my house that I so desperately want to keep. I already canceled phone and TV service to cover these past increases. Maybe they propose I stop volunteering for Boy Scouts and other charities so I can pick up a second job. I'd love to know what they think. That's the reality that people are thinking. And that person like me thinks that this budget is junk. Illinois currently has an unfunded pension liability of over $100 billion. This budget, these massive tax hikes, don't address that. 10 years ago, Governor Blagojevich shorted our pensions. This budget doesn't address that. 20 years ago, Governor Edgar refinanced our pensions. He called it the ramp. Today, our pension payments balloon every year after year after year. This budget doesn't address that. Ladies and gentlemen, this budget is junk. I urge a no vote so we can get back to work and work on the real compromise that had been started. A few days ago, negotiations stopped. I call for the continuation of that negotiation because I believe we're close. And I think that red and blue can be purple, and we can work something out, and we don't have to pass this along to the taxpayers of the state, and we can actually solve our problems. Thank you very much.
Mr. Phillips for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To the bill, I've been sitting here listening to a lot of talk, and I wasn't going to speak, but there's a couple of things I wanted to point out. First of all, if I decide to press my button to override the governor, it doesn't make me any less a conservative Republican than the rest of the people that stand in here. It makes a person decide he has to vote for his district. He has to think about all the people in his district to the best of his ability. Now, whatever way I decide to go, I'll have to live with, and I certainly am tortured by it, I can guarantee you that. My district happens to border Indiana, which is a very competitive business district. And I hate to see more businesses run to Indiana. I'm every bit just as strong for business reforms. And I'd like to see us continue to work as everybody speaks to those business reforms. But I feel like we're in a juncture, 2.5 years into it, and $15 or $20 billion of unpaid bills that maybe at this particular point in time, we're at a spot where we need to, stop, reform, and take some analysis of exactly where we're at. I have a secretary that works for me, and I was looking at her income. She makes $34,743 a year. Her actual income tax rate for the state of Illinois is 2.7. Now you ask why and how could she get 2.7 when it's actually 3.75 in the state of Illinois. But with the deductions that she currently has, it ends up she pays 2.7%. So I filled out her tax reform underneath this new 4.95% and tried to figure out exactly where would her tax rate be. And the reality of it is she's going to raise it by 0.0086%, less than 1% of the 1.25. So it's less than the 32% based on the deductions that she'll be able to take as a single mother, 2 children, and so on and so forth. So, we can spend it any way we want to. It's going to cost her $4 or $5.70 some cents more a week, and I don't like her having to pay $5.74 a week. And we'll try to work with my employees to see if we can't do something better for them. And I think that's what we're all going to have to try to do. But the reality of the spin this as if it's some huge, massive, crazy going to drive people into the ground, I think is a little bit hysterical. And maybe we should calm down, take a look at it. I think, and I'm hoping, and that's where the prayer comes in, that maybe after this, we can really, truly work on some reforms for businesses. Because I think both sides understand without bringing in new people and increasing new jobs, this state is going to go in a direction that none of us really want. So I implore all of us to work towards that end. The politicalness has to come to a stop. Transparency needs to be more open. And I wish us all the best when we get through all this. Thank you.
Mr. DeLuca for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Will the sponsor yield?
Sponsor yields.
Representative Davis, if you can answer this or whoever has to answer it. If we're successful with the overrides today, the bipartisan budget working group, what is the intention moving forward?
It appears that we would continue to meet. I think members have talked about some of the other issues, whether budgetary or not, that need to be addressed. And I would like to think that our Republican colleagues will continue to gauge this side of the aisle. We will continue to meet to work through some of the other issues that both sides think are important.
Okay, that's good. I understand the reforms will continue to be worked on. I understand that, but I'm talking specifically on this budget, whether the conversation will continue on this budget.
Well, I guess what I would say is that this particular action obviously would override the governor's veto, which means that this budget would be enacted if that were indeed the case. Okay. So clearly budget is an ongoing conversation, so we start the dialogue for the next budget.
Okay, I just want to make sure that it doesn't get shut down, because clearly we've all heard from our constituents, and there's a real distrust with the taxpayers who are going to be sending us more of their money. And they want to be sure that if they're doing that, that we are going to be spending those dollars efficiently and effectively. And we want to make sure that the budget that we are approving today, that we already approved, that we're overriding today, that we continue to look at it. And that's what I'm asking for. I just want an assurance that the bipartisan budget working group will continue to work and look at the budget and make sure if there's any areas where there's duplication, where there's waste, where there might be spending on programs that would be considered not essential, that we continue to look at that.
I would agree that that would certainly be our intent. Again, budget making process is an ongoing thing. So even in passing this particular budget, if we're successful, then yes, that conversation does continue.
Very good. Appreciate that. Thank you.
Representative Barbara Wheeler for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To the bill. All of us are hearing from our constituents that they can't afford any more taxes. Illinois is a slow growth state right now. We are not competitive. Our people are hurting. Yet now we're asking a shrinking taxing base to pay more taxes, a lot more. And that is without real reforms that provide direct relief. So guess what happens? We're pushing people out the door. Indiana, in my border district, Wisconsin, Missouri, Iowa, Kentucky. I suspect strongly that there are many in this room who still do not believe that Illinois, the people of Illinois, are leaving the state. I believe it. You should believe it. We're doing the wrong thing here.
Mr. Brady for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. To the bill. Ladies and gentlemen of the House, many of you have been here for a lengthy period of time, such as myself, and you've seen a lot of things that cause you distress and a process that I think we would all agree upon needs a major overhaul. But I think for me, the focus of my vote today is going to be that I cannot be convinced that the priorities need to be set in this particular bill when it comes to our spending. Our priorities of public education, public infrastructure, public safety, and the most vulnerable. I'm not convinced that those dollars are going to go to those priorities in this budget. If you look at it, there's so many other places where dollars are going to go that simply we have no business funding. We've lost sight of our priorities. Thus, I will not be in favor of this bill today. I will not vote to override. Thank you.
Mr. Butler for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To the motion. As I've debated in my mind how to cast my vote on this override, and I have struggled over the last several weeks with this. I've heard from many friends and advocates on both sides today's vote, but it's the stories I've heard from the citizens of the 87th District combined with my own family story that have underpinned my vote today. Over 2 centuries ago, my ancestors came to the Illinois Territory for economic opportunity. Today, my siblings have moved from this state because of our economic decline. On September 17, 1818, almost 199 years ago, a gentleman named Lewis Barker was elected the first state senator from Pope County. Barker served in the first 4 Illinois General Assemblies, helping to create the initial laws of our then brand new state. Senator Barker was my 4th great-grandfather. Barker's lineage runs through the years to me because of my mother, Harriet, and gives me the great privilege of bridging the 1st and 100th General Assemblies. My mother was born in Centralia, raised in the small Marshall County town of Lakin, attended the University of Illinois, and settled in Peoria to raise her 7 children. My parents' business was a small manufacturing company that was forced out of business under the weight of the 1980s Peoria recession. It was Harriet, actually, who was 51% owner of that business. My parents' 7 children, with our deep roots in the very foundation of the state, tell the current story of Illinois. My sister Kathy, raised in Peoria, educated at the University of Illinois, who worked for the city of Peoria and was an elected member of the Peoria Park District Board, has lived in Olympia, Washington, a state with no income tax, for the past 21 years, where she is now retired. My brother Pat, raised in Peoria, who began his professional career working for my parents' business and was the one most likely to take over the company before it was driven out of business, has lived for many years in Kingston, Tennessee, a state with no tax on wages, where he is now retired. My brother Jim, raised in Peoria, educated at Western Illinois University and the University of Illinois, has not lived in Illinois most of his adult life and currently resides in Austin, Texas, a state with no income tax, where he is now retired. My brother Mike, raised in Peoria, a tremendous basketball player who has a standout careers for both Lincoln College and Eureka College, now makes his home in Milton, Wisconsin. My brother Tom, raised in Peoria and educated like me at Eastern Illinois University, lives in Sewanee, Georgia. His two sons, my nephews, have rarely set foot in the state of both their parents. The reason my siblings have left, that's pretty easy. Economic opportunities and states with lower overall tax burdens than Illinois. But it's my sister Sue, as my only sibling, who remains in our once proud state. She lives in the district of Mr. Worley. When I hear Grant talk about the enormous burden of property taxes in the 41st district, I know all too well what he means. My sister and brother-in-law will pay almost $14,000 this year in property taxes. $14,000. My sister has been very keen on following the happenings here since I've been in the house. She is by no means a right-wing ideologue. She has no extreme right-wing agenda. In fact, she's probably the most ardent anti-Trumper that I know. But as I've been updating her during the special session, including today, she's grown increasingly frustrated. After informing her of House passage of these bills a few days ago, she told me that maybe, just maybe, it's finally time for them to move out of state, my last sibling in Illinois. And today, I see President Cullerton's remarks that more taxes will be needed after approval of this bill. What am I supposed to tell my sister? Why do I tell you the history of my family? Because it is the story of Illinois up to this very moment. It is a story similar to many I hear throughout the 87th district, of families exiting our state for greener pastures. The representative from Arlington Heights, my friend that sits in front of me, gave a very impassioned defense of this bill the other day. I have a great deal of respect for him. And I agree with the point he made. I, too, was not sent to the Illinois House of Representatives to oversee the destruction of this great state. But my family's history is example A of the need not for incremental change in our state, but for monumental change in our state. Ladies and gentlemen, raising the taxes of our friends and neighbors by 32% without making monumental change to the way our state functions does not solve our problems. It only continues them. Today I stand facing the future of our state with fear that my family's over 2-century legacy in the land of our ancestors, a legacy that crosses the state from the Ohio to the Fox, from the Mississippi to the Wabash,
Bring your remarks to a close.
spans every single day that Illinois has been a part of our union. Today I'm afraid that legacy will be snuffed out in the near future. Today, an override of these pieces of legislation will only add to the sins of General Assemblies over the past half century. We continue to pass laws that drive people from our state. And with this override, we will contribute to my family's exodus from Illinois. I cannot, in good conscience, support that direction, and that is why I will be no.
Mr. Cabello for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, to the motion. As many of you know, I do not usually speak on any of the bills that come before us, whether for or against. But I feel strongly that I need to make sure that the people back home have their voices heard. And we can take inventory, we can talk and prove to everyone back home exactly what we have been lacking in this chamber. We've lacked doing our jobs. We have lacked meeting. We've canceled session days. We have not been here near enough as what we should be to do the right job. I'm hearing from everybody back home Do what you need to do, but do not raise my taxes. Maybe if we met, we could have done some priority spending. Maybe we could have prioritized the elderly, the children, and the disabled. Maybe we could have prioritized in a budget who gets what first. But no, the urgency wasn't there. We met sometimes for an hour. Negotiations were going on. I say BS. They were not. We have a job that we are supposed to do. We are honored enough to stand and sit in this chamber to make sure that all voices are heard. The taxpayers who pay for all this have not been heard. The will of the people want to make sure that our vulnerable are taken care of, but they want them to be taken care of first. I hope that everybody back home and everybody across this state will rise up. Let everyone in this chamber know exactly how they feel after this vote is taken. I hope that they let us know that they want us to prioritize this. They want us to repeal this after we do that prioritization. Ladies and gentlemen, there are good people on both sides of this aisle. I will not berate you for how you vote. But for God's sake, we've got to prioritize. We've got to make sure that we do our jobs in committee. As an appropriations chair, we used to have working groups. We don't have those working groups meet any longer. What the hell are we doing? We wait. We make sure that there's a manufactured crisis. Because we didn't do what we were supposed to earlier. How come we couldn't have come to this resolution a year ago? Because we didn't want to. We didn't meet. We canceled days. We didn't have our working groups. And now we're punishing the people that have to pay for it all. Ladies and gentlemen, you know that I will, along with a lot of others here on this side of the aisle and on that side of the aisle, will work together to find the compromise. Unfortunately, we didn't start early enough. So, ladies and gentlemen back home, please rise up, make sure you hold us accountable, and make sure your voices are heard.
David Harris for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Speaker, and I will be brief. We had a long discussion on Senate Bill 9 the other day. There's no joy here. There's no joy in voting for a gubernatorial override of veto. There's no joy in voting for a tax increase. There's no joy. But how long can this impasse go on? I mean, we understand where we are. We are looking into an abyss, a financial abyss. The state is imploding financially, and action is required. Now, I'm going to repeat just one thing I said the other day. We have $15 billion of debt. $15 billion of debt that has accumulated $800 million of interest, and just take that $800 million of interest, put it right down there in front of the clerk's well, and light a match to it. Because that's the benefit that the taxpayers' dollars are generating. $800 million, taxpayers' dollars that are generating no benefit to the taxpayers. The effects of all this are obvious to us. Look, 25,000 people are out of work because road projects have stopped. We've been thrown out of the multi-state lottery games, which, oh, by the way, generate $90 million a year in revenue to the state of Illinois. Can't sell those tickets because we don't have a budget. We've been kicked out. The institutions of higher learning are threatened to have their accreditation removed. Who's going to send their child to a university that doesn't even have accreditation? Those are some of the basic problems of not having a budget. And then we talk about the bond rating, and it's a very, very serious issue. And Moody's said they will evaluate based on what we do if we get a budget. They will evaluate over the next period of time. Fitch and Standard & Poor's has said they're just going to hold off. Moody's is going to evaluate and see if we make those other reforms that we've talked about. And you know what? The other side of the aisle has said they will work with us on those reforms, and I take them at the word because I believe them. We want them, they want them, we want to fix pensions, we want to fix property taxes, we want to fix workers' compensation, and we are close. Our leader has said that himself. We are close. We can do it. But if we don't have a budget, with virtual certainty, we will go to junk status. At least with a budget, we hold off, but without a budget, we go to junk status. Now look, we could go for the capital compromise that was put out on June the 14th, which includes a 4.95% income tax. It includes sales taxes on services. It includes a satellite TV tax. It includes gaming revenues, presumably from an expansion of gaming that would be expected to pass. You want to vote for that? Okay, you can vote for that. I'm not voting for that. I've got a choice here in front of me. And I will tell you, and let me address a brief remark to the governor. You are an astute, capable businessman. You understand the numbers here. You understand what the implications of junk bond status. Is that what we want for the fifth largest state in the union? I disagree. I disagree that we can wait any longer to get a budget in place, and I respect those who say otherwise. But I disagree with that. I honestly believe that it is now time to right this ship of state and provide some stability and order to what has been nothing but confusion and chaos. Let's change it. We have an opportunity right now. I hate to vote for an override, and I hate to vote for a tax increase, but in this instance, I believe it's the right vote. I recommend a yes.
Mr. Durkin, for 5 minutes.
Good afternoon. To the motion, ladies and gentlemen of the Illinois House of Representatives, and for all Illinoisans who are watching us today and listening in, is this the best that we can achieve? Is this the best that we can deliver? Is this the best we can accomplish for the some 13 million residents of the state of Illinois? We've heard about the different responsibilities and the obligations of the state. Yes, I understand that. But it should not always be predicated upon more taxpayer sacrifice. These votes will be over soon, and I will not be supporting the override motions today. I do ask this question: does today's vote reflect the desires of our citizens on how we spend their money? Yes, their money. The money from their hard work and sweat. But no matter the outcome of today's votes, we all know that our work is not done. Our legacy must not be determined on today's action. My desire is that it will be determined on what we must do together as a body in the days, weeks, months, and years ahead.
Mr. Davis to close.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Thank you to everyone who spoke on the bill. Clearly, we have a different set of opinions on some of the issues, but I think Representative Harris said it best. We need to do this because without doing this, some people talk about that cliff. Well, without this, we're over the cliff. This stops us. Now, is it everything that everyone would like? No, because we don't fully fund higher education. We're still not providing all the resources we need to our human service providers. But this is a step truly in the right direction. This is the direction that we need to go. Someone's talked about bipartisanship and meeting. Well, we have been meeting. Greg Harris has led our budget team, and he's done a fantastic job of leading our budget team, along with Representative Anderson over there. Now, if you weren't invited to be a part of that, that's not our fault. That's somebody else's fault. So if that's what you want to do, representatives talked about being a part of the discussions. Well, ask to be a part of the discussions. Don't stand on the outside and throw darts at those who are in the conversations making this work. It's very important. And lastly, let me just say, threats are not the way to govern. We've heard too many times from members on both sides of the aisle that they are getting threats. At what point, some point, you got to take those threats seriously. You don't want to dismiss them because we've seen too many instances in the United States where individuals are taking actions into their own hands and harming people and their families. This is not the way we want to do it. So for those who are out there threatening people, whoever your representatives are, call them and encourage them to be a part of the process. Don't take these actions into your own hands and level threats at individuals. Nobody should have to govern. No one should have to govern under these circumstances. So again, we thank you for those who spoke earlier. We appreciate those things that you said. And yes, this is not over. Mr. Speaker, I ask for a yes vote.
Gentleman moves to override the total veto of the governor. This bill requires 71 votes. Those in favor of the gentleman's motion will vote yes. Opposed, no. The voting is open. Have all voted who wish. Have all voted who wish. Have all voted who wish. Please take the record. On this question, there are 71 voting yes, 42 voting no, and the gentleman's motion is approved, and the House, the total veto of the governor is overridden, and this bill, having received a constitutional majority, is hereby declared passed. Senate Bill 42 under the order of total veto motions. Representative Greg Harris is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, ladies and gentlemen of the House. I move that the House concur with the Senate and that Senate Bill 42 do pass, notwithstanding the veto of the governor.
Leader Curry is recognized.
Thank you. This is a question for purposes of legislative intent. Are the new bonds authorized by Section 7.6 of the General Obligation Bond Act intended to be repaid on a level principal repayment schedule, as is consistent with Section 9 of the GO Bond Act?
Yes, this bill provides no exemption from the level principal repayment schedule as provided in Section 9 of the General Obligation Bond Act.
Thank you. That was not only the right answer, it was an excellent answer. I appreciate it.
Mr. Harris to close.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen of the House. I would appreciate an aye vote.
Gentleman moves that the House concur with the Senate and that this bill pass, notwithstanding the veto of the governor. This requires 71 votes. Those in favor of the gentleman's motion will vote yes. Opposed, no. The voting is open. Have all voted who wish? Have all voted who wish? Have all voted who wish? Please take the record on this question. There are 71 voting yes, 41 voting no, and the House does override the veto of the governor, and notwithstanding the veto of the governor, this bill, having received a constitutional majority, is hereby declared passed. On page 11 of the calendar, under total vetoes, appears Senate Bill 6. Mr. Harris.
Mr. Speaker, ladies and gentlemen of the House, I move that the House concur with the Senate and that Senate Bill 6 do pass, notwithstanding the veto of the governor.
There being no debate, those in favor of the gentleman's motion will vote yes. Opposed, no. The voting is open. Have all voted who wish? Have all voted who wish? Mr. Clerk, please take the record on this question. There are 74 voting yes, 37 voting no, and the House adopts the motion, and the House overrides the veto of the governor, and this bill, having received the constitutional majority, is hereby declared passed.